Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel and welcome to my Omnibus series. I've got so many of these omnibuses that are going to come out so that you'll be able to listen to an hour's worth of stories, which I know you're going to love. You know, the thing is that telling stories is such a fine art, and it's something that was practiced hundreds of years ago when people didn't have the technology that we have today. And everyone would gather around the fire and listen to a wonderful story. And also, what is so wonderful about a story is that personally, I think it is the best way to go to sleep. Every night when I go to bed, I always listen to stories. And that's something that parents used to do with their children. It's something that they still do with their children. There's nothing better than a good story. And so I hope you're going to enjoy this series. And before we start, I just want to say, do subscribe to my channel because you don't want to miss out on anything. Because I'm in for the long haul and I want to make sure that you get the most stunning stories to go to bed with at night or to listen to when you want to be one of those people sitting beside the fire and listening. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and let's get started. I hope you're going to enjoy the omnibus.
Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, I still vividly remember the day when my life changed exponentially. It was a day that would ultimately turn our lives upside down for an entire year or so, in ways I never envisaged possible. And after that day, our lives would be on a downhill wood. Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, I still vividly remember the day when my life changed exponentially. It was a day that would ultimately turn our lives upside down for a year or so, in ways I never envisaged possible. And after that day, it would seem that everything would be in a downward spin as things got out of control, as our world would be shaken up so badly that we would become like the persecuted beads in a baby's rattle. I was 10 years old at the time, a fun-loving little boy that took a great deal of pleasure in running around out of doors and exploring the woods, and of course, as a rite of passage, getting as filthy as possible. I could literally spend several hours at a time out of doors and lose all track of time, as so absorbed was I in the fanciful world that I lived in my head. I had quite the imagination on me, and sometimes I would pretend to be a fireman rescuing my sister from a burning building, or I would be a cowboy or an Indian chief, or even a pirate that was sailing the seven seas. My sister Gretchen was an incredible sport. She'd play along with my whimsical games, and was happy when the need arose to become a damsel in distress that needed to be rescued by my heroic hands. At the time, our family owned a wonderful golden retriever mix called Pipkin, along with 2 shaggy cats called Mustard and France. Those animals I loved devotedly as extensions of our beloved family. They brought so much unconditional love into our home. There was nothing better on a cold winter's night but to share my bed with both cats, who very frequently would lie up curled together on my bed, taking full advantage of my body heat, while they in turn were like hot water bottles for me that never ever became cold. Pipkin, our golden retriever mix, loved Aunt Louise over and above the rest of us in leaps and bounds, and I'm not exactly sure why this was the case. He would devotedly follow her around everywhere she went, but sometimes he could be enticed away rather artfully from my aunt with the persuasion of a tennis ball, as he loved to catch and fetch anything you threw for him, and more often than not, he would always carry his favourite stuffed toy around in his mouth all over the cabin, and would drop the dog-eared toy at your feet if he wanted you to throw it for him. But I guess the golden retriever breed is known for being very good at fetching. I have no idea why Aunt Louise never married. I guess as kids you don't ask those awkwardly uncomfortable questions, as you nonchalantly, very innocently accept how your life rolls out for you, just like you take for granted the hot water coming out of the water faucet as perfectly normal and natural. You never wonder to yourself where the water came from in the first place. Let's just say it was a long-standing joke with the family that Pipkin was the husband replacement for my Aunt Louise, because he would sleep devotedly on the other side of her queen-sized bed, occupying exactly the same place your other half might occupy, if you were married, that is. He would always face the doorway, almost as if he was guarding Aunt Louise from any unwanted intruders, and even though he was a loving, affectionate dog, I am in no doubt he would have given his life up in a heartbeat to save my aunt, as such was his extreme devotion to her. My dad would teasingly warn Aunt Louise, in no uncertain terms, that if she were ever to meet an eligible bachelor at some stage, who she might bring back to the cabin to live with us, that he was resolutely certain that Pipkin would not take kindly to being thrown out of bed or being forced to lie at my aunt's feet, almost like a second-class citizen, so to speak. My aunt had raised a scathing brow at my father, and made a face. "Oh, don't be so ridiculous, Ivan. What on earth are you talking about? You and I know very well that that would never happen. No one could possibly take Pipkin's place. He's terribly important in my life." Whether that meant she was not interested in men, I do not know, but I never got to ask her about that, as at 10 years old I never considered it strange that Aunt Louise had never married, or that she lived with us. I do know that my Aunt Louise and my mother Angela could never ever live apart. They would have absolutely hated the idea. They were as thick as thieves and were like two slippers. One didn't fare too well without the other being around. I guess my father realized when he married my mother Angela that he was indirectly marrying Aunt Louise as well. My Aunt Louise was my mother's identical twin sister, and you really could not tell them apart, even if you tried to guess who was who. They used to tell me and my sister a plethora of hilarious stories about how they would change places at school, pretending to be each other, which rarely made me laugh, as they were able to lead people up the garden path, as no one could tell who was who. Let's just say when people saw them walking side by side down the streets of Anchorage, they would probably think they were seeing double. My father, of course, could always tell the difference between the two women, and one distinctive feature was my Aunt Louise had a scar on her right arm, which she had acquired as a girl, and although it had faded with time, it was still very discernible. If you look close enough, that is. The injury was caused from a rather unfortunate run-in with a very angry billy goat, which Aunt Louise encountered when taking a shortcut through a farmer's field, when walking the family dog. I think she was 15 years old at the time. The billy goat thought my aunt and her sausage dog Pegasus imposed a very formidable threat to the two female billy goats that he was obviously intent on impregnating with his virulent sperm. Woe betide if you got anywhere close to those female goats, you were in serious trouble, because this billy goat was not for sharing, and was willing to put up quite the fight if any competitors dared to cross his path, regardless of what they looked like. I think he thought my aunt was trying to challenge him. She had nonchalantly walked past the goats, not realizing the trouble that was brewing in her wake, as the male goat, with an angry enthusiasm of a bull charging at a matador's red flag, began to race towards Aunt Louise. My aunt had failed to see the warning signpost that the farmer had put up on the trail, which read, "Beware, angry billy goat." That was an understatement, to say the very least. Angry was not the word. This billy goat was incensed at the very sight of my aunt, wearing jeans and a T-shirt, and walking along with a sausage dog devotedly at her side. My aunt, of course, had tried to make a hasty escape when she realized she was being charged by this doggedly determined bucking billy goat that was pounding away at her with its horns, causing my aunt a plethora of bruises and scratches. Aunt Louise ran to the barbed wire fence and crawled under it as fast as she could with her dog at her side, who escaped, of course, without so much as a scrape. But alas, Aunt Louise didn't fare quite so well, as a piece of wire indiscriminately tore through her flesh, so deeply, in fact, that she acquired stitches on her arm. I gather the nurse who was stitching her up at the time said, "How the heck did you manage to do this to yourself? That's quite some cut you've got. You're also going to need a tetanus shot, I suspect. It looks nasty." My Aunt Louise had said, "If I told you what happened to me, you wouldn't believe me." It would seem after the injury had healed up, it had left behind a very discernible scar, which meant that you could always tell my Aunt Louise and my mother apart. and that was useful for those who were challenged in trying to determine who was who. There were, of course, other discernible differences with my Aunt Louise and my mother. My mother was much more uptight than Aunt Louise was. She'd get more anxious and take life a whole lot more seriously. Let's just say she was the world's worst worrier, whereas Aunt Louise never worried about a single thing. She was a risk-taker, took life in her stride, and had an adventurous spirit. I remember we went to a fairground once, and Aunt Louise didn't hesitate to take a ride on the roller coaster, but my mother simply couldn't do it. Just seeing it going round and around at such a speed made her really quite queasy. So yes, there were differences, but they were so subtle. I could never understand the conundrum of why my Aunt Louise and my mother would wear exactly the same clothes as each other, day in and day out, like they had done when they were children, as I know their mother, my grandmother, had loved to dress them the same. I could understand them doing this as children, but as adults I did think it was awfully strange. It rather surprised me that they didn't want to express their own individuality. The only differences in the clothing that they might wear might be that one of the twins might wear a different pattern or colour in the same style of dress. One woman might wear white cowboy boots, the other brown, in exactly the same style, but a different shade. My mother and her sister had dark brown hair done in exactly the same fashionable style that was neatly cropped on the shoulders, so it was clear they wanted to look exactly the same, which happens a lot with identical twins, which is something I can't exactly understand. For me personally, I'd like to be different. I wouldn't like to be told I looked identical to someone else. I've always prided myself in my individuality, but my mother and her sister seemed to like looking exactly the same. When I asked my father why this was the case, he just said, "Let them be, will you? Twins are complicated. For them, looking the same is expressing themselves. I know it's hard to understand, but it is the way it is." My sister Gretchen was almost 8 years old, so I was 2 years her senior. My father was a journalist working for a local paper in Anchorage. He worked at home a lot in his study, where he'd spend countless hours blasting away at his computer keyboards and spending a lot of time on the telephone or on emails discussing various projects with people. Failing that, he might be at the main office in Anchorage doing an investigation or sometimes working with other journalists. Sometimes his work might mean he was away from home for a while, visiting other states, and occasionally even going abroad. He was also a ghostwriter for people who wished to write their own autobiographies, but wouldn't know how to do so in the first place because they couldn't write. And he'd occasionally write articles for company magazines. When my father was away from home, we were left to our own devices, without the man of the house being around. My Aunt Louise was a teacher by profession, but instead of working at a local school, she harnessed her attention in homeschooling us, and gave us a formidable education. My father paid her handsomely for her trouble, although she'd have happily not accepted any wages at all. She was a brilliant teacher, who devoted her time to giving us individual attention. At the time I had no way of comparing my lifestyle to your average American kid. We lived in what I would describe as an idyllic setting, in a charming, postcard-perfect cabin in Alaska that looked like something out of a fairy tale, or something you might observe adorning a delicious box of Swiss chocolates. Let's just say, to the casual outside observer, they probably wouldn't have an inkling that the dreamy impression the cabin so obviously conveyed left no hint of how bleak things could ultimately become during the winter months, when temperatures invariably plummeted to well below zero. Winter was a powerful force to be reckoned with in Alaska, that could cruelly govern the snow-covered wilderness, with blizzards and heavy windstorms that can make the cold weather very vicious indeed. So much so that being caught out in the snow could be deadly. Ostensibly on the inside, our cabin really was, in every sense of the word, sumptuously cosy and warmly welcoming. My mother and Aunt Louise had such a natural flair with decor, but they chose furnitures like sofas and chairs that were practically begging you to take a seat and lift up your legs after a long, hard day. Everything in that cabin was not only aesthetically pleasing to the eye, but built with only comfort in mind. When you entered the cabin, you were immediately greeted to a warm, welcoming atmosphere. We were lucky, as our cabin was situated not too far away from Anchorage, and we would pick up supplies from Anchorage at least once a week when we did the big shop. Me and my sister Gretchen loved to go to Anchorage for a shopping day, as it was a day out for us. We'd enjoy a more suburban adventure that didn't involve trees or wild animals, but ice creams and candies. My parents would usually treat us to a yummy lunch at the diner, where we'd order burgers, French fries, and scrumptious double-thick chocolate milkshakes. If my mother was feeling extremely generous, that is, she'd take us to a toy store to buy ourselves something extremely special. I would return with a pirate's hat, or an Indian headdress, or some kind of slingshot perhaps, while my sister liked teddy bears and all kinds of fluffy animals, but never once did she show any interest in owning a doll, which was unusual for a girl of her age. We would enjoy our weekly visit to the old-fashioned sweet shop that was run by a dear old lady called Mrs. Goldman, who was a buxom woman in her 40s, who always wore a blue and white apron around her ample midriff. "Hello there, young man," she would say to me with a bright, cheery twinkle in her eye. "What will it be for you today?" She would grab a blue and white striped paper bag and would point to the large bottles of sweets on display on the shelves, of which there were so many, too many to count, and she'd fill our bags up with sweets and give us a few extra as a gift. I always felt incredibly important when she devoted so much attention to me, as if buying sweets was a very important job. She'd give me a wink, and I would leave that sweet shop feeling like I'd just been to candy heaven. One morning in the middle of what I would describe as one of our bleakest, most miserable winters on record, where my sister Gretchen and I were regulated to staying indoors most of the time, it would seem going out in these perilous, rather treacherous conditions was tantamount to putting your bare feet into a bowl of ice-cold ice, until they became so numb you could no longer feel them at all. We would only embrace the outside elements when needs must, when we had to sweep away the snow that had gathered on the outside step, or sprinkle salt across the walkways to reduce the possibility of slipping. Every morning it was my job to collect firewood from the stash outside in the shed to bring indoors, that my father had assiduously prepared and chopped up meticulously over the summer months, especially for winter. And in that shed was a mountain of firewood that reached the ceiling, along with a whole heap of coal that we could get through incredibly quickly, as it took a whole lot of fuel to keep our cabin snug and warm all winter long. Me and my sister Gretchen were acquiescently expected to do our chores every single day. My father would always say it was good to get our hands dirty, as nobody ever got strong without learning to lift a heavy load. Even my 8-year-old sister was expected to pull her weight around the place. Ostensibly, when you grow up in Alaska, you simply can't afford to depend on others all the time. You need to learn to be self-sufficient. You never know when you might find yourself lost in the wilderness. Our father had taught us wilderness survival skills that go hand in hand with living in the wilderness. Me and my sister knew how to make a fire without matches and to build a shelter for ourselves. Our father had taught us how to hunt and fish. I was also responsible for helping my father chop firewood, and so at 10 years old, I was pretty strong for my age. Aunt Louise didn't care what the weather was like. She'd always insist on taking Pipkin for a 30-minute walk, well, almost, come rain, shine, or snow. The only exceptions to this steadfast rule of hers was when the weather was treacherously windy or hazardous blizzards were wreaking their chaotic havoc across the tundra, meaning that it would only be a fool who would dare to venture outdoors. When Aunt Louise returned from her walk, her nose was usually bright pink and her cheeks were flushed. She would instinctively run up to the log fire in our living room to warm her frosty hands, when finally she'd remove her gloves and say, "Ah, that is so much better." She'd shake her fingers that were as pink as her face and say, "I almost feel human again. Goodness gracious. I always forget how dreadfully cold it is out there. But Pipkin, he doesn't care what the weather is like. He seems invulnerable to it all." I would tell my Aunt Louise that I wasn't remotely surprised she was complaining about the cold. She always insisted on walking Pipkin twice a day, in less than congenial, sometimes perfidious weather, but nothing seemed to intimidate or daunt Aunt Louise, as like many Alaskan women such as herself, she was made of tough, very robust stuff, and she and my mother, although slender, were athletically very strong, with muscles in all the right places. Aunt Louise would tell us to get our books out. She taught us our lessons daily at the desk in the living room. Pipkin would flop down lackadaisically by her side, where Aunt Louise took her seat at the head of the table. He would drift into a deep, very contented sleep, very satisfied after spending some time out of doors with Aunt Louise, chasing after some very interesting scent trails, which he was lightly now dreaming about. We would work at the large walnut desk table, all the while listening to the sound of a crackling fire, accompanied by Beethoven's concerto playing in the background. My aunt emphatically believed that playing Beethoven would inspire our creativity and enhance our learning abilities. Whether she was right about this, I'm not entirely sure, but learning while listening to music was not a bad thing. It had been a laborious struggle, a battle, if you like, to get out of bed on that icy cold, tempestuous winter morning that I always remember so vividly well, when everything later that morning would go badly awry, in ways I would never have imagined possible. The temperatures had severely plummeted. My mother was strict about punctuality and about us getting up early every day. She believed we needed to be disciplined as you would be if you were attending a local school, where you were expected to arrive at a specific time. The lessons from teachers would also be regulated to a certain timetable. My mother emphatically believed our lives should always be very structured, with lessons and breaks regulated to set times, so that our lives slipped seamlessly into a regular routine. "Children need routine," she would tell Aunt Louise. "During the week, their lessons and breaks must be at set times. Imagine if they are older and they think it's all right to rock up at an interview half an hour late, because they never grew up knowing the importance of strict timekeeping and punctuality, because it's terribly rude to be late for things. If they're being homeschooled, they need to understand these disciplines. Otherwise, their interaction in the real world will be like a train smash." Every day during the week we were expected to be up and dressed and seated at the breakfast table by 7:30 sharp and no later. Woe betide you if you were late. My alarm had gone off earlier that morning, and it had been so hard to get out of bed because it was bitterly cold, much more so than usual. Our 2 cats were snuggled up to me so tightly, like great big balls of dense fur. I couldn't bear to be parted from the generous warmth that they supplied me with. I knew my mother would not be best pleased that I arrived in the kitchen for breakfast late, but this morning, I hasten to say, even my sister was facing a similar struggle to get up, and so we both attempted to get dressed in record time, understanding full well the trouble that awaited us. I entered the kitchen looking like I'd been run through a hedge backwards, with my sister straggling awkwardly behind me, like the badly dented tin cans on the end of a car when somebody's just got married. We both looked like sorry sights indeed, for very sore eyes. But that's what happens when you get dressed in a rush. "Where have you been?" my mother asked us when we finally entered the kitchen. "You're 10 minutes late. Your porridge is getting ice cold. Why are you not on time this morning?" "Oh, Mum, it's just so cold," I said. "It really is so cold. It was so hard to get up." "That's no excuse, Donovan. You know the rules. I like you to be up and about and rearing to go at 7:30 sharp. Is that too much to ask of you? And why is your hair in such a dreadful mess? It's flying all over the place. It looks like a bird's nest. Honestly, how can you turn up for breakfast looking like this? If you turned up for an interview like this, you'd never ever get the job. No one could take you seriously looking like this. They'd think you'd been dossing on the street corner. You look quite frightful." My sister began to chuckle as she found my mother's description of my hair, looking like a bird's nest, hilariously funny. "What on earth are you laughing at, Gretchen?" my mother said. "You think it's funny? You're amused, are you, that your brother's hair looks like a bird's nest? Well, you're no better. You should take a long, hard look at yourself in the mirror. You're wearing your sweater back to front and inside out. And as for your hair, goodness gracious me, don't you kids know what a comb looks like? The 2 of you look like you've just walked out of a tornado." "I'm so sorry, Mum, but it was so cold this morning. I was in a big rush to get dressed. I could go back to the bedroom if you like, brush my hair, put my sweater on the right way round if you like.
No, it's too late for that. It's not necessary, my mother scolded. Your porridge is getting cold, but in the future I would appreciate it if the two of you took greater care of your appearance. It's very important to present yourself to the world looking respectable. Is that understood? You don't have a second chance to make a first impression. Always remember that.
Yes, Mum, I'm sorry, I said, suddenly feeling rather ashamed by the little attention I had paid to my appearance that morning.
Is this really necessary, Angela, to lay into the children like this?
Asked Aunt Louise, coming to our immediate defence, almost at once.
Don't be too hard on them, Angela, she said.
Aunt Louise gave me a reassuring wink.
It's cold out there. The children are right about it. It's very hard to get up when the weather is so freezing like this. And it's dark outside as well, which doesn't help. Surely you can appreciate that.
My mother glared at Aunt Louise.
Whose side are you on, sis? You know how I feel about discipline. It's very important that my children grow up with a regimented routine in their lives. If they were at school, it would be no different. I want them to experience the same regimes at home. Otherwise, they will grow up thinking it's all right to be late for everything, or to look like a bomb site when you arrive at an interview. They need boundaries in their lives, like we had as children. Our mother was very good with us like that, and I want to follow her fine example. It's very important, don't you see?
My Aunt Louise wilfully ignored my mother's rather brusque remarks. She clandestinely winked at us and gingerly gestured for us to both take a seat at the breakfast nook, where she dished us up generous bowls of steaming hot porridge, served with warm milk and dark molasses like sugar. My mother had claimed it was freezing cold, but it was piping hot. This was followed by boiled eggs and toasted buttered brown bread. I always liked the weekends so much better, as not only were we allowed to sleep in, late, but breakfast was 1,000 times more delicious than anything we ate during the week. On Saturday mornings it was hash browns, bacon, sausage, fried eggs and toast, and on Sundays it was always pancakes with maple syrup, crispy bacon and eggs. But during the regular weekdays, breakfasts, I'm afraid, were characteristically always the same, rather dull, mediocre and nondescript. After breakfast we were expected to clean up the breakfast things. My sister would invariably help my mother wash up the dirty dishes in warm soapy water, while I would leave the cabin, carrying a wicker basket to the shed, so that I would fill the basket up to the brim with firewood. And then I would return to the cabin. Sometimes, if there was a bracing wind out of doors, these simple mundane activities could be quite the challenge, rather like diving into an ice-cold lake for a few seconds, and then getting out. I would carefully, very strategically, add firewood to the crate. Then I would take another trip outdoors to collect more wood and also coal. My mother would often dry old orange peels to throw onto the fire, which were amazing fire starters and would get the fire going very quickly. We would ultimately be doing our schoolwork in the living room. It was important that we would be toasty warm, because let's not kid, if you're too cold, you're never going to successfully concentrate. Once me and my sister had completed our chores, which seemed to go on forever, we would then prepare the long worn-out desk table in the living room for our lessons of the day. We would arrange papers, books and pencils on the table. The first lesson of the day was always math, without exception, and that was because me and my sister could not stand math, and Aunt Louise thought it was best to get the things we didn't enjoy out of the way first. Me and my sister were 2 years apart. We were at different levels in our education, so Aunt Louise would turn her undivided attention to our individual needs. The only drawback, of course, of being homeschooled is we didn't have many friends of our own age, which was something I always deeply regretted, as it would have been fun to hang around with other kids. Once the lesson was completed, when it was light enough outside, this would be the quintessential time when Aunt Louise would take Pipkin for his walk. And we would have our first break of the morning, where my mother would give us some hot chocolate and a couple of raisin bran cookies that she had baked herself, that were always so delicious. During our break, me and my sister would invariably settle down to play a game of snakes and ladders, or any other board game that tickled our fancy. We'd keep ourselves preoccupied, while we waited for Aunt Louise to return from her 20 to 30-minute walk with Pipkin to resume the second lesson of the day. My father would often look in on us during our break, and he would ask us how our lessons were going with Aunt Louise, and what we'd learnt in math. As you can imagine, given we hated math so much, we didn't have much to tell him. He would then glance at his watch and say, "Goodness gracious me, look at the time. I better get back to work. I've got so much I need to do." If I had a penny for every time my father said that in my young life, I would be a rich man indeed. We would watch our father retire back to his study to work on his articles, of which there were so many. My father could be working on several projects all at one time. So let me tell you, it's not only women that know how to juggle several things all at once. My father was a master at it. In truth, I'd never seen anyone work as doggedly hard as my dad. And when he was happily tucked away in his office, sometimes I even forgot he was there. But I do know this, that even though my dad was always preoccupied, always industriously busy, he loved his job. And I hoped when I got older, I'd be able to say the same about mine. After our math lesson with Aunt Louise that morning, me and my sister were taking our regular morning break. We were drinking our hot chocolate in mugs and dunking the raisin bran cookies into the warm drink so that they melted in our mouths. It was a habit my mother described as nasty and extremely vulgar, so we did this behind her back whenever she wasn't looking. I tentatively watched Aunt Louise on this freezing morning, prepared to take Pipkin out for his regular morning walk, into the heart of the formidable elements that knew no mercy. I had already braced the freezing cold weather earlier on in the morning, so I knew how vengefully cold and spiteful the weather was, as I had brought in baskets of coal and firewood, and the weather was so cold it had burnt right through me, and the wind had fiercely tugged at my clothes with a feisty enthusiasm. The world outside was covered in thick carpets of glistening snow. Trees had long since been immodestly stripped of their glorious, beautiful summer finery, and were now bedecked with layers of white frosting, while fir trees, the evergreen wonders of nature that grow abundantly around here, had their needled boughs heartlessly anointed with delicate crystals, made to look arrestingly beautiful. The weather was relentlessly unforgiving, and I knew that all too well from bitter experience, so my only thought in my head was what was wrong with Aunt Louise. Why on earth would she go out of doors in weather like this? But I knew there was no point in reasoning with her. Why would Aunt Louise listen to a 10-year-old boy such as myself? I need not have worried. My mother would persuade Aunt Louise that the weather, with its whipping wind and snow sweeping across the tundra in sheets, might not be a good idea to embrace this morning. But then again, one thing I'd always learnt about Aunt Louise over the years is that she was rather like an unbridled wild mare that wants to break out of the stables all the time. And when she's like that, wild horses cannot stop her from doing what she intends to do, even if what she is doing is very foolish indeed.
"Honestly, Louise, must you really go out today of all days?"
my mother asked Aunt Louise. I could see she looked a little bemused by my aunt's stubborn enthusiasm, as you could hear the wind moaning outside.
"Why don't you just take Pipkin outside to do his business for a while? Let him run around for a bit on his own, and then you can bring him back indoors. That's what most normal people would do. It's so bitter out there, very frosty. Why would you want to go for a walk, especially with a wind brewing over the tundra like that? It's going to get a lot worse, you know. The forecast is not good. Because as you so elegantly put it, Angela, I'm not normal, and I'm not remotely worried about the forecast, so to speak. You're exaggerating about the weather as you always do. It's not that bad. I'm going to give Pipkin a 20-minute walk, for goodness sake. Besides, I find the exercise very invigorating,"
my aunt interjected. She knew my mother didn't approve of her going out of doors in conditions like this, but to Aunt Louise this was not a day where the psychogenic weather had persuaded her to remain indoors. Yes, there was an unmerciful, rather brisk wind blowing across the tundra, Yes, it was numbingly cold out of doors, but the precarious contrary wind was not feisty or bone-chilling enough, most obviously, to stop Aunt Louise from enjoying a walk with Pipkin, for nothing was going to stop her from her intrepid daredevil adventure, it would seem. She loved taking Pipkin outdoors, and she believed the dog was her own. My Aunt Louise seemed resolutely determined to go for a walk that morning, and there wasn't a jot anyone could do about it. She was like fixed cement that has been laid down by a builder. She was so set in her ways, there was no undoing her resolve. With a heavy heart I apprehensively watched Aunt Louise, throwing on her wintry outer garments, a woolly hat, a scarf, and a pair of red leather gloves, while Pipkin was wagging his blonde shaggy tail furiously, and letting out some delighted woofs. I could see how ebulliently excited he was to go outdoors. Much like my aunt, he wasn't easily put off or dispirited by bad weather. Aunt Louise left the cabin, walking with Pipkin at her side. They trudged through the snow together. He was running ahead of her rather swiftly, his nose firmly devoted to sniffing the snow-covered ground, as if on the lookout for an intriguing scent trail he might pick up. Finally they were gone through the trees, and I could see them no longer, and all that was left behind was a trail of their footsteps that had disturbed the pristine snow. For some reason on this morning I couldn't shake off the direful, rather foreboding, disheartening feeling that something was going to go badly awry. I knew, of course, the unstable, somewhat vacillating weather could rarely turn, as it was as fickle and temperamental as a bloody-minded woman who'd been through half a dozen husbands already. I really wished with all my heart that Aunt Louise would not be so indomitably stubborn and uncompromising by insisting on taking Pipkin for a walk, when the wind, I secretly suspected, would not remain as deceptively tame and docile as it first appeared. Sometimes it was so much better to be safe rather than sorry, but Aunt Louise never looked at life through a lens of doubt. Instead, she optimistically seized the moment at every opportunity, and never really considered the ramifications or consequences of some of her choices. And yet when things did invariably go pear-shaped for her, she didn't seem to learn the lessons from her mistakes. "What's wrong with you, Donovan?" my sister Gretchen asked me. "Your face has gone all white, and you keep staring out the window. You're supposed to be playing snakes and ladders with me, or have you forgotten?" "It's just Aunt Louise," I told her. "I mean, there's quite a wind whipping over the tundra, isn't there? My bed is going to get a lot worse. I don't want Aunt Louise to get caught up in a horrible windstorm. She thinks she's strong and all that, but she's no match for a hefty wind, is she? Mum couldn't talk her round, because, as usual, Aunt Louise refused to listen to anybody. She's the obstinate twin, that's what Mummy says. I just think she shouldn't be out there, that's all. I battled a great deal this morning, you know, just getting to the shed to put wood in the wicker basket, because the wind was so nasty and it was so cold. I mean, I was practically thrown over just taking the small journey to the shed." My sister rolled her eyes. "You're 10 years old. You're a lot smaller than Aunt Louise is. She's got muscles, hasn't she? So she's strong like Mummy is. You worry too much. Aunt Louise is taking Pipkin for a 20-minute walk, that's all. It's only a short walk. She'll be back to teach us English very soon, like she always does. The wind isn't bad, you know. Well, not yet it isn't. But I don't fancy going out myself. But I'm not Aunt Louise. Come on, don't stare out of the window. Are you going to play with me or not? The game won't play itself, will it?" "Sorry, sis, I was just distracted." I was grateful to play the game of snakes and ladders that my sister had skillfully set up on the carpet, because if the truth be told, right now I didn't want to worry at all about Aunt Louise. It would seem she was all I could think about. I regret to say I was so much like my mother in that regard, who's inclined to worry about absolutely everything. I seem to have inherited that rather unfortunate gene from my mother that was going to bring me great discomfort in the future, I rather suspected. Aunt Louise would tell my mother that worrying was a complete waste of time and energy. "It's like a car without any petrol, isn't it? It won't get you anywhere very fast, and theoretically it won't accomplish much. Soon I became absorbed in the game of snakes and ladders, and I almost forgot all about Aunt Louise. My mother eventually poked her head around the living room door, her eyebrows raised. "Your Aunt Louise is not back yet?" she asked. "It's been 30 minutes, for goodness sake. What's taking her so outrageously long?" My mother then walked through the living room, over to the window, staring out towards the trees, a frown playing out on her face. "Honestly, that sister of mine is absolutely incorrigible. Look at the weather. The wind is not slowing down in the least, is it? It's getting significantly worse. And your aunt is still out there. She said she'd only be 20 minutes. What on earth is keeping her so long?" "Maybe she's lost track of time," I offered. "She likes taking Pipkin for walks. You know what she's like." "That is no excuse. Your Aunt Louise promised me emphatically she'd be no more than 20 minutes. She knows how much I worry about her. I'll have words with her when she gets back. She's supposed to be teaching you English right now." I could feel a thick, clammy fog developing in the back of my throat. Something didn't feel right. Aunt Louise should be back. She should have been back 10 minutes ago at the very least. My mother was right. What was keeping her? The wind was getting significantly worse, as bursts of snow blew fiercely across the tundra. I wouldn't want to be walking in conditions like this, but I had to remind myself that I was not Aunt Louise, and she was a lot stronger than I was. If my aunt had been a horse in this life, she'd have been a Belgium draught horse, that in the olden days were used for carrying sleighs, ploughs, and carriages. That was how indestructible Aunt Louise seemed to be at times, which meant I was forgiven for sometimes believing she wasn't a woman, despite how feminine she was. My sister, sensing my obvious concern, drew my attention away from my worries, so we continued playing our game of snakes and ladders. 15 minutes later, my mother returned to the living room. She looked flustered, rather ashen in the face, like a chicken in a coop that has been rudely disturbed by a fox. She hurriedly marched over to the window, staring out towards the trees. She shook her head furiously, her whole body jiggling in indignation. "Where has your aunt got to?" she almost growled. "She should be back by now. Look at the wind. It's getting a whole lot worse. Why the hell won't your aunt listen to me? Something's happened. I know it has. I can feel it in my bones. But your Aunt Louise is up to her old tricks again, causing us to worry. Twice we had to rescue her from a blizzard, and she still hasn't learnt a damn thing." My mother's rather ominous words were playing the same dreadful tune in my head over and over again. The only difference, she was expressing her misgivings outwardly. "You worry too much, Mummy," my sister interjected. "Aunt Louise can look after herself. She's going to be fine. I know she is." "That's the problem," my mother said. "I don't think your Aunt Louise is fine. How can she possibly be fine if she's not back yet? I'm going to have to go out there myself and find her. I hate going out there in such disagreeable, obnoxious weather like this. But I haven't got a choice, have I? I'm telling you, if your aunt dares to come back in one piece, looking as if I've been worrying about nothing, I'll kill her myself. I will wring her neck like a chicken. And I'm not joking either. She knows I will worry if she takes too long on her walks. How can she do this to me? How can she?" I watched my mother, padding herself in layers of insulating warm outdoor wear, so that she would be fully insulated from the cold. She was wearing exactly the same warm clothes as Aunt Louise was wearing when she left the house, so if I was to see her walking back through the trees, I could easily mistake her for Aunt Louise. Finally she put on her woolly hat and her red leather gloves, and looked up at us. "I won't be very long, kids. I'm going to find that aunt of yours, if it kills me. And when I find her, I'm going to have her guts for garters, because she's got some explaining to do." "Do you want me to call Daddy?" I said. "He could come with you to help you look for Aunt Louise." "I'm not going to disturb your father," said my mother. "He's very busy at the moment. Besides, you know what he's like. He'll tell me I'm panicking for nothing. I can do this myself. I'm going to look for your Aunt Louise, and I won't be long." I watched my mother from the lounge window, following Aunt Louise's fading footsteps in the snow, as more snow began to fall. The wind was quite bracing. I couldn't help feeling sorry for my mother, for the last thing she wanted to be doing was to find Aunt Louise. But I guess she couldn't stand waiting for Aunt Louise to get back. So it was better to go looking for her. My sister Gretchen was exactly like Aunt Louise in so many ways. I realized how extraordinary their likeness was. She was smiling up at me and seemed so grown up all of a sudden. She was very clever for a girl of 8. Many people could not believe she was that young, but I guess you grow up fast in Alaska, as everything here tends to be bigger.
"What's so funny?" I asked her. "Penny for your thoughts." "Mum's making such a terrible fuss about Aunt Louise, isn't she?" "I promise you, Aunt Louise is absolutely fine. She'll be back soon. Come on, let's carry on playing our game. We keep being interrupted and it's very, very annoying."
I reluctantly sat down on the carpeted floor, close to the crackling fire, trying desperately to concentrate on our game of snakes and ladders. But it was a struggle to focus. My heart was wildly aflutter, my mind a chaotic, tangled spin, my thoughts going around and around in circles, like the clothes in a spin dryer. Why wasn't Aunt Louise back from her walk yet, I wondered. It was a short while later I heard Pipkin excitedly barking, and inwardly I sighed with relief. It could only mean one thing. Aunt Louise was back. Silly me, I'd been worrying about nothing. My sister grinned.
"That's them," she told me. "Aunt Louise and Pipkin are back. I told you were worrying about nothing."
Me and my sister instinctively ran over to the window. I was expecting to see my mother and Aunt Louise trudging together through the snow, walking side by side. My mother clearly giving her an earful about how worried she'd been, and how selfish Aunt Louise had been to venture out of doors like this, in such bracing weather. I was naturally expecting to see Pipkin rambunctiously leading the way, with his nose dragging along the snow, and his blonde upright tail wagging furiously. But that is not what I saw. In that quintessential moment I scrunched up my eyes, as I was sure the vision I was seeing just did not correlate with what I was expecting to see. I almost thought my vision had become somewhat distorted, impaired and blurry. This couldn't be right, could it? Who the hell was that? The wind was blowing quite badly by now. It was wailing aggressively and beating against the front door of the cabin with loud, obtrusive banging sounds. I could see Pipkin nonchalantly running next to a strange man. He was so incredibly big. He must have been at least 10 foot tall. I'd never seen anyone a day in my life so arrestingly big, that the size of this man took my breath away. He could be in the Guinness Book of Records, I thought, for being one of the tallest people in the world. I'd never seen anyone quite so big in all my life. He was either wearing a woolly onesie, or he was covered in thick dark hair like a black bear. He was powerfully built with a strapping body, and wasn't wearing any boots on his feet. My heart almost plummeted when I saw this huge man appear to be carrying a bundle in his arms. I looked at the bundle more closely, and realized to my horror it was Aunt Louise. She seemed to be asleep. What was wrong with Aunt Louise? Me and Gretchen, realizing that Aunt Louise must be in trouble, unhesitantly ran out of the cabin towards the huge man, without even bothering to put on any outer protective wear. I'd never seen anyone look like this man before, but at 10 years old, his rather peculiar unorthodox appearance was the very least of my concerns. My undivided focus was more on Aunt Louise than the man walking towards our cabin. When he walked, he made light weight of the heavy snow, and the wind, with its powerful whips, it didn't seem to deter him at all.
"What happened?"
I asked once I finally reached the man.
"Is Aunt Louise all right?"
The big man spoke to us in a strange language.
"Kampantila noko, asila tua, hina fila bono."
But before I could say, "I don't understand what you're saying, sir. Do you speak English?" the meaning of the words seemed to just drift into my mind, almost as if I knew exactly what he was saying. It was only after the strange encounter I thought it was weird that I'd been able to comprehend his strange dialect. How did that happen?
"It's windy, and it's very bad out there. A big gust of wind blew her into a tree. She's out cold. She needs help. Where can I put her? She needs to sleep it off, and in her case, it's going to be a long, long sleep."
I hurriedly opened the cabin door, where this huge man was so big he had to turn his body to one side and bend his head to duck right under the door frame to get into our house, because he was that big, and our door was a large one. "Is she going to be all right?" asked my sister, looking up at the big man, who rather reminded me of King Kong, only his face was remarkably human. It seemed the most natural thing in the world to be talking to this hairy man. Pipkin seemed to like the hairy man as well, and that dog was always a good judge of character. My father once had a friend around at the cabin to stay for a couple of days, and Pipkin didn't like him in the least. He growled at him tirelessly, and would not let Aunt Louise out of his sight. That was how discerning Pipkin was. The huge man carefully laid Aunt Louise down on the couch. I tried to wake her up myself, but she continued to sleep. I could feel she did have a pulse and was breathing, but something was wrong with her, because she wouldn't wake up. That was really strange, I thought. The hairy man shook his head and said, "She's going to have a very long sleep. But yes, she will wake up one of these days. Not to worry about that. Just keep her nice and warm for the time being. Inta kikakwanse ha kilasobo masalatina." "How do you know she'll wake up, sir?" I asked him.
"Conto la mattina calosopocoloni a cansaquani hicolopona." "Because it's not her time," said the man. "You need to let her rest. Don't disturb her."
And before I could ask the hairy man any more questions, he had simply sashayed out of our house and gone from our sight. "Who was that?" asked my sister. "I never seen him around here before. He seems so nice. I can't believe he's got hair all over his body, so he doesn't have to wear clothes like we do. He's very lucky, don't you think?" "Pipkin, stop that!" I reprimanded. "Stop licking Aunt Louise's face. The big hairy man says she needs to sleep and get lots of rest, so leave her alone, will you?" Pipkin failed to listen to me. He pawed at Aunt Louise, licking her face, whining and looking up at us with dark eyes, as if to say, "Why don't you do something? Wake her up." "Let her sleep, Pipkin," said my sister. "The hairy man says she needs lots and lots of rest." Moments later we heard a door slam, and then we heard my mother running through the house. She seemed out of breath, and she was saying, "I can't find your Aunt Louise anywhere. What on earth am I going to do? I think I'm going to need your father's help after all. This is such a fiasco, such a dreadful mess. The weather is frightful out there. The wind is blowing up badly. Something is terribly wrong with your Aunt Louise. She's missing." My mother practically wailed as she said this. The fear in her eyes was palpable. "Aunt Louise is back. She's just having a nap," I said matter-of-factly. "She mustn't be disturbed. She's very, very tired, you see." "Why didn't you tell me this, Donovan? Can't you see I'm practically having a meltdown?" "She's back, is she?" said my mother, looking at me nonplussed. "You say she's taking a nap? Are you kidding me? I'm going to kill her for putting me through so much grief. She has the blatant audacity to go to sleep. Are you kidding me? She has lessons to teach. Has she forgotten her responsibilities here? What is wrong with that woman? In fact, what is wrong with everybody this morning? Is there something in the water?" My mother stormed into the living room, looking so ferocious that I almost became afraid of her. My mother rushed over to Aunt Louise and shouted, "Get up, will you? I can't believe you're taking a nap. How could you do this? You go off for a walk in terrible, terrible weather, and you come back afterwards to vegetate on the couch. I've been worried sick about you. We all have been. You need to get up right now. I'm not putting up with this nonsense a moment longer. What the hell are you playing at, woman?" As my mother shook her sister, her face drained of all its colour. "What is wrong with her?" she asked, looking up at us with a puzzled expression on her face. "She's sleeping," my sister said. "She needs to sleep. The man says she must have a long sleep before she wakes up. Can you see? She's very, very tired." "Don't be ridiculous," my mother said. "She's not sleeping. She's out for the count. We've got to get your father at once. Something dreadful has happened to your aunt. She's not waking up. But thank God
God she's breathing, that's all I can say. She needs to go to the hospital at once. How on earth did she manage to get back into the cabin on her own? In this state, I ask you."
"She didn't. The big man brought her here," I told my mother. My mother was so dismayed by the state of my aunt, as there was no outward signs as to why she appeared to be comatose. I don't think my mother heard my references to the large man who had so kindly rescued Aunt Louise and carried her all the way to the cabin, laying her down very carefully on the couch in the living room. The next thing I knew was my dad arrived on the scene asking what the hell was going on and what was the commotion all about. He took one look at Aunt Louise and knew something was decidedly wrong. Without asking any questions, he didn't waste a single second of time and immediately took Aunt Louise to his vehicle, where he propped her up in the back seat with blankets and pillows, and then he was gone, rocketing through the snow at an incredible speed. He told my mother he was going to the hospital and he'd keep her posted as to how Aunt Louise was doing. My mother looked tormented to be left at home, but I guess she had to stay behind to watch over us. My mother was clearly overwrought with worry. I could see it written on her face, and I felt so desperately sorry for her.
"Is Aunt Louise going to be all right, Mummy?" my sister Gretchen asked her. "Why didn't she wake up?" "That's an excellent question you ask, Gretchen," my mother said, "one of which I do not know the answer to. I have absolutely no idea or comprehension about what happened to your aunt out there on the tundra. I can only imagine." My mother shook her head furiously. "I just wish your Aunt Louise would listen to me. Why does she have to be so damn carefree, so dreadfully insouciant about things? You saw me, didn't you? I tried to persuade your aunt not to go out with the wind letting up like that. But you know your Aunt Louise. Nothing will stop her walking Pipkin unless there's a fierce blizzard blowing. That woman thinks she can conquer all weather, and she can't. She needs to realize her limitations. She's not built like a snowplow, you know. What is wrong with her? How on earth is it that she just can't wake up?"
My mother suddenly looked at us.
"Do you know what happened?"
she said suddenly, as if it had only just occurred to her that we might be able to fill in some of the blanks for her, from this enigmatic conundrum, so to speak.
"How did your Aunt Louise manage to get to the couch to lie down on her own? And when she did, what condition was she in when she returned to the cabin? Did you even actually get to see her before she settled down on the couch to go to sleep? Did you see anything at all?"
"No, silly," said my sister. "Aunt Louise was fast asleep when she came to the cabin. So the very big, hairy man carried her here and put her on the couch for us. He was very nice, wasn't he, Donovan?" I nodded. My mother looked perplexed.
"But who is this man you're talking about? Did he give you a name? There are no random strangers living around here, you know. How did your aunt ever run into him in the first place? Who is he?"
"I don't know who he is," I told my mother, "but he's very nice. He told us that Aunt Louise was going to have a long sleep and then she would wake up. He told us not to disturb her, but to keep her nice and warm. He put her down on the couch and we covered her with a blanket and brought her a pillow."
"But did he tell you what happened to your Aunt Louise?" my mother asked us, seemingly determined to get to the bottom of this mystery.
"Well, he said the wind got very bad. It was blowing badly and Aunt Louise was flung into a tree. She hit it hard and then she fell asleep."
"I knew it. I knew something like this would happen. That sister of mine, she just drives me crazy. Always having to do what she wants to do, never thinking about the rest of us, not for a moment." "You say the man witnessed this whole event," my mother continued. "How extraordinary! What on earth was a perfect stranger, I ask you, doing in these parts? If I ever see him again, I must thank him for his kindness, to your aunt, that is. She was knocked out cold, and if he hadn't found her, God forbid, she could be lying there in these treacherous, unforgiving conditions, and maybe no one would be able to find her. Oh, dear me, the thought is too dreadful to even contemplate."
I am not exactly sure what was going on with my Aunt Louise, as when my father returned home from Anchorage, he informed us that Aunt Louise had been admitted to hospital, but he didn't reveal very much to us.
Is she going to be all right, Daddy? Gretchen asked him. Of course she's going to be fine, Bug, my dad said. But as kids, we picked up pretty easily that there was doubt in my father's eye. My mother rushed forwards into my father's arms and sobbed into his shirt, saying over and over again, Why wouldn't she listen? Why wouldn't she listen? I told her not to go out into the weather, but you know how obstinately stubborn Louise is. I can't believe she's got a head injury of all things, after flying into a tree. You wouldn't suspect a thing, would you, looking at her, I mean? No, you wouldn't, my father agreed. But that's because the bleeding is all internal, and the damage is on the inside, although there is a significant amount of swelling on the head. Look, love, my father told my mother, it's still early days, and things can change, so we need to remain extremely positive and get on with our lives as we always do, taking one day at a time. But I can't just pick up the pieces of my life without Louise around, my mother protested indignantly. She's part of me. When she's hurting, so am I. I understand, love, but you're going to have to be strong for your sister's sake and for our family. As I was saying, it's early days. A lot can change. But what do the doctors think? I don't know what they think. They didn't reveal much. I told you, they told me it was a waiting game. We just need to be upbeat about this. You can visit your sister as often as you like in hospital. Don't worry about the children. I will stay with them here at the cabin. I really wanted to know what was going on with Aunt Louise, but I'm afraid to say my parents did not reveal much. There was much hushed talk among my parents. They didn't want us to know what was going on with our Aunt Louise. I asked my somewhat evasive father, who was never forthcoming, if Aunt Louise had woken up yet, and whether her condition had got worse or better. She sustained a head injury, son, my father told me rather cautiously. There is some internal bleeding and swelling on the brain. They're doing lots of tests, aren't they? Currently she's in a coma. What does coma mean, Dad? I asked. What it means, Donovan, is that your Aunt Louise is sleeping currently, my mother interjected. Let's just say she hasn't woken up yet. But I'm very certain she's going to be fine and make a full recovery. But my mother's words sounded vacuously hollow and non-committal. She and my father would exchange these private looks, which made me in no uncertain doubt that Aunt Louise's health was declining, and knowing this scared the bejesus out of me. What if we never saw Aunt Louise again? What if Aunt Louise died? I tried to shut out those horrifying thoughts, but I was riddled with an infestation of worry that refused to abate, and at 10 years old, I felt as if I was carrying the entire weight of the world on my very small, narrow shoulders. For some enigmatic reason, my parents falsely assumed that being vague about Aunt Louise and her precarious condition was the kindest thing to do for us. But I was not stupid, nor was my sister. We could feel the insufferable stranglehold of overwrought emotions in our household, so strongly, in fact, that it was almost impossible not to know that my mother was hanging on to a thread of hope. But every day that thread was getting progressively weaker and weaker, as if in any second it might just suddenly snap. My mother's morale sank to an all-time low. She became lethargically bleak. She was not eating very much. She lost a whole lot of weight, and there were sadly sunken hollows around her eyes. She had become almost skeletal, and although she was supposed to be supervising our lessons for us and teaching us in Aunt Louise's place, she did not commit herself to doing anything, as her mind was so fractured by her grief. She would leave us to our own devices, unbeknown to my father, who would have been appalled if he had known the lack of supervision and guidance we were receiving from her. It was like my mother was caught up in her own dreamy, illusory world, 100 million miles away from our current reality, as most of the time she seemed to be disconnected from us, preoccupied with her own thoughts, and barely functional in her daily life. Let's just say my mother, who once held the family together with a formidable cast-iron grip, seemed to be falling apart very easily, like a crumbling cookie, without Aunt Louise around. It was then that I realized how when you're a twin, without the other half, like my mother was to Aunt Louise, and with her no longer being around, she felt as if life had thrown her a curveball that she couldn't easily overcome.
My mother said to me,
"Donovan, help Gretchen with her schoolwork, won't you? I'm sure you can easily supervise your own study as well, can't you, love? I've got other things I need to attend to around the house."
"Of course, ma'am," I had said, determined to be as helpful as I possibly could. I wanted to ease some of the pressure off my mother's back. I knew by the sorry sight of her she was not coping at all well, as Aunt Louise was one of the most important people in her life. I know that for my mother, being an identical twin had for her meant that she and Aunt Louise had practically been joined at the hip. Now it seemed Aunt Louise had been ripped away from our lives, and my mother was not faring well as a consequence. I would pray to God every single night to bring Aunt Louise home safe and well, but it felt as if my desperate prayers had fallen on deaf ears, almost as if God himself was not listening to me. Every time my mother returned from hospital after visiting Aunt Louise, she visibly became more and more subdued and forlorn, as if her hopes were being squeezed out like the remaining juice in a lemon until there is nothing left to give. When she did acknowledge us, she'd snap at us and get extremely angry about the smallest things that would set her off like an alarm clock that you couldn't shut up. Suddenly everything little and insignificant that would normally not have been a big deal for her had become like the end of the world, especially like when I dropped some boiled egg on my shirt one morning. You would have thought I had committed a grave felony, or that World War III had just started.
"Why are you so messy, Donovan?" she practically screamed at me. "Look at the boiled egg. It's supposed to be in your mouth, not all over your crisp white shirt," my mother said, rolling her eyes at me in exasperation. "Honestly," she said, shaking her head objectionably, "I despair with you kids. Sometimes I really do."
"I'm really sorry, ma'am. The egg just dropped off my spoon," I explained, trying to tell her it wasn't my fault, just a sleight of hand, but there was no reasoning with her.
"You dropped some boiled egg just randomly off your spoon, is that what you're trying to tell me? To anoint your crisp white shirt with yolk? Honestly, that wouldn't have happened, Donovan, if you'd paid attention when you were eating your breakfast. Is that too much to ask?"
My mother then picked up a piece of cutlery off the breakfast nook and furiously flung it at the wall to let off steam, and then stormed out of the kitchen, leaving me and my sister close to tears. We couldn't understand why our mother was being so awfully mean-spirited towards us and so incredibly unreasonable. But our father assured us that hurting people tend to hurt people, and that we mustn't take our mother's outbursts too personally.
"Give her time, kids," he told us. "You must remember, this is your mother's sister Louise we're talking about. It's difficult for folk like us to fully understand the bond between identical twins. But with your Aunt Louise in such a bad way, and still in a coma, in hospital, well, your mother isn't handling things very well, is she? Don't be too hard on her. Give her some time. Help her around the house as much as you possibly can, to make life a little easier for her. I'm sure she will appreciate your efforts. She's going through her personal dark night of the soul, so to speak, so none of this is easy for her."
"But Daddy, she's always angry. She barely acknowledges us anymore," I complained.
"Look, kids, your mother's grieving. She's worried about your Aunt Louise."
"But Aunt Louise is going to get better, isn't she, Daddy?" my sister interjected. "Mummy said she would get better. She promised she would." My father grew very solemn, almost as if a dark cloud had suddenly crossed over his face. His voice lowered.
"Don't tell your mother I told you this, will you? But to be perfectly honest with you, the doctors aren't holding out much hope for your Aunt Louise. It's not looking very good at the moment. I don't think they believe she will recover, but your mother refuses to give up on your aunt. So this is a very delicate time for her. I'm only telling you this not to upset you, but to help you understand why your mother is in such a dreadful state of late."
"But the doctors are wrong, aren't they, Daddy?" my sister persisted. She was like a dog with a bone, determined to hear my Aunt Louise would be all right from my father.
"But of course they're wrong, Bug,"
my father said affectionately, running his hand through my sister's curly blonde hair, looking for a second as if he almost regretted telling us the sobering truth about Aunt Louise's flailing condition. But my sister didn't seem to be taking on board the gravity of everything, as at 8 years old She had such a positive, optimistic outlook on everything, and in her illusory world where fairies and angels roamed supreme, she doggedly entertained her imagination with only happy endings to every story that was ever told.
"Well, Mummy's just being silly," she insisted. "Aunt Louise is going to get so much better. She's going to come home very soon, and everything is going to be just fine," my sister piped. "That's right, Donovan, isn't it?" she said, her keen blue eyes fixed pleadingly on me, willing me to say anything else other than to agree with her that Aunt Louise's story would ultimately have a happy ending. "Of course she's going to get better," I said, in a voice that clandestinely hid all my doubt. To all intents and purposes, during this tumultuous, rather troubling time, our father was our only anchor for holding things together, because quite frankly my mother had lost it, and was now seemingly living in an alternative, rather hollow reality, in which we did not seem to exist. On numerous occasions my father had very diplomatically told my mother to visit Dr. Thornby, our family GP in Anchorage, but my mother was having none of it. Her burgeoning depression appeared to have ingrained itself into the pores of our cabin, rather like a rancid cancer that was getting progressively worse every single day, and it had almost certainly drained the joy away from our home, as clouds of hopeless, cloying, almost defeated darkness seemed to hang over our lives, like an oppressive curtain. My parents began to engage in tireless arguments together, and before Aunt Louise's fortuitous accident, they had never argued a day in their lives. They were stingingly at each other's throats, day in and day out. I think my father was glad to escape to the confines of his office, just to get away from my mother's insolent rhetoric. She was so unpleasant to be around. Each day she got more and more cantankerously pugnacious, and there were times I thought my mother fit the profile of quite literally being the world's worst mother, but I kept such thoughts to myself. Following my father's methods of successfully escaping my mother, likewise me and my sister Gretchen would shrink away to the living room, where we would embroil ourselves in our studies. We would do everything in our power to avoid our mother, or any contact with her. My mother had successfully withdrawn from basic household duties, such as preparing our meals for us. Me and my sister Gretchen became incredibly hungry, with young healthy appetites that needed feeding, so we became industriously resourceful. I'm proud to say at 10 years old I learned to cook by reading my mother's recipe books, and so I was the one that began to organise the family meals and take charge of things around the kitchen. Me and my sister Gretchen had learnt to fend for ourselves, as our sense of survival seemed to kick in. My mother was increasingly spending more time in her bedroom, sleeping for hours at a time, and we began to barely see her at all. I think sleeping away her melancholia had become rather like a coping mechanism for her. She barely went to see Aunt Louise again, because seeing Aunt Louise in such a precarious condition upset her all the more. "Look, love," my father said to my mother, trying to be as tactful as he possibly could. "I know you're upset about Louise, but we can't go on like this as a family, can we? You're very much upsetting the kids. Even Pipkin is a little down in the dumps these days. Everyone's picking up on your downcast energy, and it's not healthy. You really need to get your act together. Everything in this cabin is falling apart, and you are at the helm of the ship, and now you're not, so everything is crumbling. Donovan is doing all the cooking of the meals, and Gretchen helping with some of the household chores. It's asking a lot for our kids to be playing the role of caregivers in our household. They're very young. They should be out there enjoying themselves. You've always been such a good mother, but now you don't seem to care about anything anymore. You're always distracted these days." "Oh, so this is my fault, is it? Is that what you're saying? That's rich. I've been going through hell, I'll have you know. Can't you possibly understand that? Do you know what it's like seeing my sister Louise lying in a hospital bed in coma, never knowing if she's ever going to wake up? Do you have any comprehension of what I'm going through? Do you?" "I understand that, love. I know how close you are to your sister Louise. But you're not coping, are you? Anybody can see that from a mile off." "Of course I'm not coping. Talk about stating the blindingly obvious. Louise is my identical twin. Without her, I'm absolutely nothing. Can you appreciate that at the very least?" "Don't be ridiculous, love. You're a person in your own right. You're an individual. And although you are physically identical to your sister, she does not define you, nor do you define her. I just think—" "Oh, what do you think? Spit it out, then," said my mother, glaring at my father contemptuously with killer looks, and straddling her arms on her hips in a defensive gesture. "I think you need to see Dr. Thornby. He's an excellent GP, with a very good listening ear, I'm told. It's obvious you've sunk into a deep depression. I think if he were to prescribe you some anti-anxiety medications, it would help a great deal, so that it would take some of the sting out of your pain, so that you could manage your life a lot better. You know it makes a lot of sense. Everyone needs a little help from time to time, and they shouldn't feel ashamed to ask for it." "Medication!" my mother snorted. "I don't need medication. Are you trying to say I'm mentally deranged or off my rocker? Is that it? I'll have you know my sister Louise is in hospital, and she might not wake up from her coma. I think I'm entitled to be upset, don't you? It doesn't mean I need medication." "Of course you're entitled to be upset. We are all very upset about Aunt Louise. But this is more than about being upset. You're falling apart, love. I can't simply sit back to watch you physically decline like this. I'm your husband. I have a duty of responsibility to take care of you, do I not? What kind of a husband would I be if I didn't get you help?" My mother gave my father a look of scathing disgust. "So dragging me along to see Dr. Thornby for some medications is your answer, is it?" "I think you need to see him, love, as soon as you possibly can. You're not coping with your life. You need help. Lots of people take anti-anxiety medication when they're going through a struggle. So should you." "How dare you tell me what I need to do?" said my mother, growling. She stormed off to her bedroom, slamming the door behind her so loudly that the entire cabin began to wobble and shake under the ominous vibration. My father looked at us and sighed in exasperation. He was totally spent trying to reason with my mother, who was mulishly stubborn at the best of times, even though she was a lot less so than her sister Louise. But without Aunt Louise around, my mother's stubbornness seemed to have stretched over the boundaries of even being reasonable. My father ran his hand through his dark black hair, and that was when I noticed the bags under his eyes, and how broken up he looked. I realized that my mother, her moods, her temper tantrums, and obvious depression were sucking the life out of the all of us. But my father was not faring well either. I guess he was beginning to wonder if he was losing his wife. "Don't be sad, Daddy," said my sister Gretchen, instinctively running towards my father and wrapping her small arms around him and refusing to let go. "I know Mummy is very sad at the moment, but if Aunt Louise would wake up, then everything would be all right, wouldn't it? Why can't somebody tell Aunt Louise to wake up? It's very, very mean for her to keep sleeping when everybody wants her to wake up, and she can't be tired anymore. She's been asleep for a very, very long time. She's upset everyone, hasn't she?" "You're right, Bug," said my father. "If Aunt Louise would wake up, everything would be all right." "Somebody needs to tell Aunt Louise to stop being so lazy and sleeping for so long. She needs to wake up now. I get into trouble if I oversleep during the weekdays, but nobody gets angry with Aunt Louise when she's so naughty because she never stops sleeping anymore." "It's not as simple as that, Bug," my father said, "but I sure do wish it was." I was having sleepless nights, worrying about Aunt Louise, and whether she'd ever return home or not. Pipkin was visibly distressed, with her not being around about. The dog had tuned into the negative energy in our home, as no one had laughed in our cabin for ages. The fun-loving home I'd always known and loved so much had lost its lustre. Even though I was helping with the cooking, I was not particularly good at cleaning up after myself. The place was a bit of a pigsty, a disagreeable mess, with dirty dishes accumulating in the sinks and clothes strewn haphazardly all over the place in puddles, while dust collected on the furniture. It was my father who began to run our house for us, as well as spending his time focused on his full-time job, because my mother seemed incapable and incompetent of doing anything, and appeared to have gone into hibernation, rather like a bear. Me and my sister were much happier when my mother locked herself away in her bedroom for hours on end,
I found myself praying that she wouldn't come out of her bedroom, as just seeing her made me feel miserable. The house was much more calm without her presence around. Pipkin began to follow me everywhere I went, as if I had now become his newly adopted best friend. The cabin felt so dreadfully soulless without Aunt Louise around, and this was a time in our lives that I rarely felt as if happiness had eluded us. After a while my mother did begin to make an appearance, around the house that is, but she looked absolutely dreadful, like a mad washerwoman who'd put her hair through a vat of oil, as it hung around her face in greasy strings. She never bothered about what she wore, and appeared to wear the same sweatpants every single day. She would scramble around in the wine cellar and bring out a bottle of wine, and very often she would start drinking in the middle of the day, and I knew that this was not good.
What the hell is wrong with you, woman?
My father said to my mother, when he realized she was using drink as a tool to drown her sorrows. It was one thing my mother locking herself away in her bedroom for days at a time, but turning to alcohol was not a solution that would solve any problems in a hurry.
Get a grip, will you? You can't start drinking to drown your sorrows. This is ridiculous. You have kids to look after. You're a mother. You're leaving them to fend for themselves, make their own meals, wash their own clothes, because you don't do a damn thing around here. You're bone idle and incredibly selfish. That's what you are. What kind of a mother does that? You should be ashamed of yourself.
My mother whined.
You don't understand. I need the alcohol. It calms down my nerves. It makes me feel somewhat better.
My father grabbed the bottle of wine from my mother. He was outraged. He looked more livid than I'd ever seen him look before.
You don't need this. It will destroy you. Alcohol is not your friend, and it isn't a solution.
He had thrown the bottle of red wine into the sink, where it crashed into a million pieces, and all the wine drained away, leaving what looked like a residue of bloodstains behind on the white sink. My mother charged over to my father indignantly. Her dark-rimmed eyes were gouging with rage. It looked as if they were on fire. She began to pummel his chest with her fists.
I needed that alcohol. How dare you waste perfectly good, very expensive wine like that and toss it away? I needed that to calm my nerves. You didn't need alcohol, Angela. What you need is to get a grip. Yes, I know how tough this has been for you, with your sister being in coma. But you have to hold it together for the kids' sake and for me as well. We need you to be around for us. And if you turn to alcohol, we will lose you. There are people all over Alaska, as you well know, dependent on alcohol and drugs. We've got a problem in this place. I don't want your sorry story to be added to those stats. You need to be strong, love. I wish you would go and see Dr. Thornby. I really do. You need help, and drinking wine is not the solution to your problem. It'll make things 1,000 times worse.
My mother burst into tears.
Louise is going to die, she cried out. I know she is. She might never wake up, and I'll be on my own for the rest of my life. What are you talking about, Angela? You've got me and the kids, have you not? If the worst were to happen, you would not be alone. We are here for you. You need to be strong. Besides, there are people who have been in coma that have woken up, even after years of being out cold. You don't need to lose hope, not yet anyway. The doctors still say there's a slim chance she might wake up, don't they? Oh, you believe them, do you? Slim chance? What does that mean? I can read between the lines. I'm very savvy like that. I don't believe they hold out much hope for her. What if they insist we switch off the machine that is keeping her alive? Then we lose her for good, don't we? What if they say she's become a vegetable and there's no more activity left in her brain? What then? We will cross that bridge when we come to it, Angela. But medicating yourself with alcohol is not the answer. Do you understand? This is not a solution, and I'm sorry, but I can't have my kids watching their mother turn to drink.
My mother nodded. She blew her nose into her tissue and wiped her tears away.
You're right, of course. I will admit that, she said, straightening up rather stiffly. I need to get a grip. She told herself more than us. I won't drink any more, I promise. Good. That's what I hoped you would say, Angela. I'm proud of you, said my father, walking away and returning to his study. I knew when my father's back was turned, my mother would go straight back into the wine cellar and grab for herself another bottle of wine to soothe away her angst, for nothing would stop her, as her determination was fierce. Once my father had left the kitchen, my mother turned around to look directly at us. I think the only thing on her mind was to get rid of us. She could clandestinely then go to the wine cellar and retrieve for herself another bottle of wine. "Go, will you?" said my mother. "Why don't you both go and play outdoors? It's a lovely, lovely day today, and I think you should make the most of it."
"But what about our studies?"
I asked. "Oh, don't worry about those. Everybody deserves some time off, don't they? Why don't you go and have some fun for a change?" Me and my sister didn't need any further prompting. This was an opportunity when we didn't have to study, but enjoy ourselves instead. So we hurried out of doors, happy to be away from my mother, on this beautiful, inviting spring morning, where an ethereal burst of sunshine lit up the entire landscape in a resplendent, soft, warm glow. The spectacularly beautiful scenic views that stretched out before us were like a warm, all-embracing hug, which did much to ease the stormy trepidation in my own heart. I was genuinely glad to be out of doors. It was medicine for the soul, especially after the cold, brutal winter that we had just endured. I hungrily lapped up the sunshine, and the feel-good factors that come from spending time out of doors immediately uplifted my spirits, and seemed to have a positive uplifting effect on me, as this injection of sunshine was exactly what the doctor ordered. Pipkin was the most delighted of the three of us to be running around in circles, barking jubilantly. His tail thrashed around, and his enthusiasm to be outside was infectious. He made both me and my sister laugh. I think it was the first time in ages I can honestly say we'd actually smiled. Before long, me and my sister were ambling down the zigzag of footpaths through the trees. We were steadily making our way towards the undulating hilly meadow, covered in vast, exquisite stretches of fragrant alpine flowers. It was here where we would find the large oak tree, which stood up proud and tall, seemingly stretching out its gargantuan branches to the heavens, rather like a monk deep in prayer. This was a tree we loved to climb. Me and my sister had even carved our names and dates of birth into the robust, very sizable trunk. It was here we'd often sit in that tree, in the branches, for hours on end, just living in the moment, and watching the world industriously go by, like birds in the heavens flying from one tree to another, or a deer darting through the trees, a squirrel racing up a tree trunk, and so much more, of course. As we walked through the trees, we sashayed past the creek of fast-moving water. I loved that creek so much. It was making such a loud, gurgling, thunderous noise. We could hardly hear ourselves think. We often frequented that creek during the summer months, with our fishing nets at hand, where we would paddle in the water with our pants rolled up to the knees, trying our level best to catch fish that seemed to fly past us at the speed of light. We'd sometimes caught a few stragglers if we'd been very lucky, and the occasional frog, but we'd always put back what we'd caught into the water. Today we had no intention, of course, of playing around the creek, although I will admit I was sorely tempted to do so. But today me and my sister Gretchen had promptly decided we wanted to hang out around in the reassuring, comforting branches of the old oak tree that had become like a good friend to us. My father told us once that this old oak tree was between 400 to 500 years old. I often wondered if the great enduring age of the tree was why we liked it so desperately much, for we always gravitated towards it when we needed to lift our flagging spirits. I think the tree, having been grounded to the earth for so long, was like a wise old soul to us, giving us a sense of perfect security that sadly at the time was lacking in our daily lives. Put it this way, we had almost certainly been caught under the stronghold of my mother's lugubrious melancholia that hovered around the cabin like an unfortunate smell. So gravitating to the beauty of the natural world was healing and cathartic, and made us feel both safe and secure. I knew we both would feel much better escaping the gloominess of the cabin to spend some quality time outdoors. Even the inviting fresh crisp air and the warm sunshine seemed to put a band-aid on our current sense of hopelessness that we all felt. We finally reached the alpine meadows,
bespeckled with magnificent beautiful carpets of pretty yellow, white, pink and purple flowers, the first eruptions of spring's glory, that had thrust their jewels through the earth with an unwavering tenacity, and cast their beguiling charms over the meadows in a splash of joyous colour, which they did year after year during the spring to summer months without fail. "It's so beautiful out here," my sister cried out with glee, her words echoing my very thoughts. I watched Gretchen skipping through the meadow. She picked up some flowers which she put in her hair. "Do I look like a princess, Donovan?" she asked me, doing a double twirl so that I could take a long hard look at her. "You sure do," I told her. My sister's face was glowing. She looked radiant, and for a brief moment we forgot about the silent pandemonium that had disrupted our lives. We forgot about my father studiously working in his office. We forgot about Aunt Louise lying in a hospital bed, fast asleep, with the nurses and doctors monitoring her every need. We even forgot about my mother, who was in no doubt waiting for the perfect opportunity to steal away another bottle of wine from the cellar, when nobody was looking. Right now it was us against the entire world, and I felt so elated being out here, among so much beauty, that for a while my troubles seemed so far away, seemingly beyond my reach, like a kite that had blown away in the sky. "Race you to the oak tree!" my sister cried out. "I bet I can beat you, Donovan!" "No, you can't," I said competitively, leapfrogging ahead of my sister and reaching the tree steps ahead of her, but feeling slightly out of breath, as my sister could run like the wind. But I was not going to live it down if she ever beat me. "You might be a bit faster than me," she said, "but I'm still a better climber." Of that I could not dispute, as I watched my sister ease her way nimbly up the branches, as if she had been a monkey that lived in the trees all her life. She made climbing a tree look beautiful and elegant, like when you're watching gymnastics and the athletes do these incredible twists and turns. They make it look easy until you attempt to try and do the very same thing yourself. I'm afraid I was not nearly as agile as my sister, so my attempts to climb the tree were done with more of a heavy hand. The old oak tree was designed for climbing, and me and my sister wasted no time in climbing into the branches. The first sprouts of spring leaves were visibly on display. Pipkin stared up at us, scratching the bark of the trunk with a paw, looking at us through his soulful dark eyes, as if he didn't feel entirely comfortable with us looking down on him from such a vast height. "I think he's sad because he can't climb," my sister chuckled. Pipkin lay down under the tree, stretching out his paws lackadaisically, while we sat in the branches staring at the scenery for miles around, and watching bees and butterflies pollinating all the flowers. All of a sudden Pipkin sat up erect. His ears were pinned forward. His blonde tail thrashed the ground excitedly, and then he suddenly took off through the alpine field like a bullet. "What's that all about?" asked my sister. "I don't know," I said. "He seems happy about something, doesn't he?" "He sure does," Gretchen agreed. "That's how he reacts when Aunt Louise comes back from Anchorage. Well, when she was well, that is." I climbed down the tree with my sister Gretchen following behind me. We quickly chased after Pipkin, calling his name, but he refused to pay us any heed. And then we saw the object of his undivided attention. Lo and behold, we discovered that Pipkin had picked up the scent of the big hairy man that had rescued Aunt Louise from the woods on that bitter cold day in winter, with blustering winds and heavy snow, when a blast of wind had thrown her into a tree, so that Aunt Louise had lost consciousness after a head injury she had attained. The kind hairy man had brought her back to the cabin for safety. It was rather strange to run into him again like this, and it was in this quintessential moment I fully appreciated just how huge he actually was. Let's just say, standing next to him, I realized how by contrast me and my sister Gretchen were like fragile porcelain dolls that could so easily break. I had never felt this way about myself before. This hairy man was genetically hardwired to be as robust as a Californian redwood tree. He seemed as surprised to see us, as we were indeed to see him, as if he'd been caught off guard, so to speak. But let's say Pipkin recognized the hairy man at once, as there was no doubt he was so thrilled to see him. He was jumping up and down ebulliently on the Herculean-sized man, pawing him to demand his attention. "I'm so sorry about Pipkin," I apologized, my face reddening with embarrassment, as Pipkin was demanding attention, and I didn't like the way he was behaving. "I guess he remembers you from when he saw you last. I think he really likes you." "Get down, Pipkin," I ordered. "Get down! Don't be so rude." But Pipkin, normally inclined to be obedient, simply refused to listen to me. The hairy man did not speak for a moment, but there was a humorous twinkle in his eyes. He bent down to squat on his powerful thighs, and affectionately took Pipkin into his overlong arms, and he began to pat Pipkin, and Pipkin was lapping it up like a cat with a bowl of milk. He was soon rolling on his back, straddling his blonde legs in the air, and demanding a tummy scratch, and the hairy man instinctively scratched Pipkin's stomach, as if he could tune in to what Pipkin wanted, and not everybody knew that Pipkin loved having his stomach scratched. The hairy man suddenly got up and broke off a sizable twig from a branch, and threw it for Pipkin to catch, chuckling as he did so. Pipkin began to woof in delight, and charge off after the stick, bringing it back to the hairy man's feet, and dropping it on the ground, sitting back on his haunches while he waited for the hairy man to throw the stick for him again. I'd never seen anyone throw a stick so far. In an eager haste, I tried to copy the hairy man by throwing a stick for Pipkin myself, for the dog to catch. But I regret that my cumbersome efforts were stunted, and the stick didn't go terribly far. The hairy man showed me how it was done. He corrected my posture and positioned my arms in such a way to improve my swing. But even though my throwing improved exponentially, it was still a long way off from being as impressive as the hairy man's. I couldn't help but like the hairy man instinctively, as did my sister Gretchen. We were both incredibly comfortable in his company. I had guessed he was a wild man of sorts, that probably lived in the woods and hunted his own food. You get that kind of unorthodox maverick man, living out here in Alaska, who enjoys fending for himself and living off-grid. I assumed this wild hairy man was like one of them, but his size and the hair that covered his entire body was, I have to admit, a tad unusual. Consequently, under the bright light of the morning sun, his hair, I realized, wasn't black, but a dark brown shade. His arms were so long, and his shoulders impressively big. Later I was to learn that the hairy man was known by many as a Bigfoot. "Do you live around here?" I asked him curiously. The hairy man spoke to me in his native tongue, but I naturally seemed to understand what he was saying. "Kantolo baki ha masa, hilati kaswani, ha kilasono paka." I don't live in any Pacific location, but I do have my favorite haunts, and this part of the world is one of them, so I keep coming back here as often as I can. I like this place very much, because if you must know, this is where I was born. He then pointed towards the woodgrove and singled out the tree covered in bright pink blossoms. "You see that tree over there? I was born under it. Over there," he said. "My mother wasn't expecting me to arrive quite so quickly, so I took everyone by surprise when I popped out, so to speak." "You were born under that pretty tree over there?" I asked, looking both bewildered and impressed, as being born under such a magnificent tree was so much better than being born in a mediocre hospital bed like I was. "I was," he said proudly, "and I'm glad to say it was in blossom like it is now. My mother said I arrived in the world like a windstorm that she never saw coming. There were no warning signs for her, just a very slight cramp in the stomach and a few twinges, and that was followed by a sudden urgency to push me out, and then there I was. I just slid out of her body, and then I began to cry. I was born with effortless ease, and my mother had no pain apart from the little cramp. It was under a full moon that I was born, which our kind consider very special. When I fortuitously arrived on the scene earlier than anyone anticipated, the first word my mother uttered, that came out of her mouth, that is, was Umbenga. So that is what my parents decided to call me. I think it's a very appropriate name in the circumstances, do you not think? Hampan Takilakwa,
Umbenga, talikasana quanilo.
Umbenga, I said. What on earth does that even mean? I've never heard of that name before, but I do kind of like it.
It means the one that comes out fast without any delay. So that's my name.
So you're Umbenga, I said, repeating it. I do like it.
Well, I live up to my name, he assured me. I have a reputation for being in the right place at the right time. Everything I do is instinctive, and it's always fast and efficient.
He paused for a brief moment and looked at me with questioning eyes.
Kali tola pansikwa. Is the lady still sleeping? He asked me.
Sorry, I said. What are you talking about? He means, interjected my sister, who was always as sharp as a tack. He's asking you if Aunt Louise is still sleeping. I'm afraid so, I said uneasily. She hasn't woken up yet. She may never wake up, so my mum's very sad about it all. It's horrible being indoors with her because my mother is miserable all the time and very mean to us. And she gets so snappy. She's been a bit better recently because she's drinking alcohol, and my father believes she's stopped, but we know differently, don't we, Gretchen? My sister nodded. Mum is really horrible these days. I so wish Aunt Louise would stop sleeping, and then we could be happy again. That's why we're playing out of doors. My mummy kicked us out of the cabin because she wants to drink in secret without us seeing her. She started to drink because she's really upset all the time about Aunt Louise. She's angry because Aunt Louise is very lazy and refuses to wake up. She's been sleeping for so very long.
Kolo paki santwa, hakila sana tolono, magilani kolo manasu, shansikwa. Your mother is upset about the sleeping lady that I brought to your cabin? The hairy man asked. Why would she be upset? She needs to exercise a little more patience. When the winter comes and it gets very cold out here, I know that in the months that lie ahead, the summer will be around the very next corner. And when summer comes, everything bursts into blossom all over again. New life begins. All the animals and plants know all this, due to their instinctive programming. With everything there is a season. You can't hurry it forward prematurely. Look at the flowers of the field. They've been programmed to flower in spring and summer. If they flowered in the winter months, they would surely die, be suffocated to death by the snow. With everything it has its perfect timing. Even the bears know when it's time to go into hibernation. Everything wakes up at the right time, and so will your aunt. But impatience will only sever your mother's hope.
But you don't understand, I explained. My mother doesn't think Aunt Louise will ever wake up. She thinks Aunt Louise... I did not want to complete the sentence, as my sister Gretchen was looking directly at me through her big blue inquiring eyes that didn't miss a beat. At 8 years old, I don't think she had any real comprehension about how serious Aunt Louise's condition really was. Because in her whimsical mindset, Aunt Louise was obstinately refusing to wake up because she was bone idle and incredibly lazy and didn't want to get out of bed. So I couldn't say the words to the big man because I felt as if I might be tempting fate. I knew it would also upset Gretchen if I should talk about Aunt Louise's condition with such a downcast projection, but at the same time I really wanted the hairy man to know that my Aunt Louise might never wake up. The hairy man shook his head. I think he knew what I was implying. He seemed to read my mind like an open book. I noticed his soulful, dark, treacle-coloured eyes were sharp and discerning. I've never known anyone to read my thoughts quite like that, which in itself is scary, because I wouldn't want someone to know what I was thinking all the time, as this hairy man so obviously did.
I told you, when I saw you last, it wasn't her time, the hairy man assured me. Hankila na tolompanki. I can see in you a great deal of worry, a great deal of distress, many sleepless nights. You spend so much of your time concerning yourself with things that may never happen. You create in your mind a chaotic tangle of thoughts, and when you think like this, it is not good for your health. It is no way for you to conduct your life."
"Whose time isn't it yet?" asked my sister. "What are you talking about?" she said, looking from me to the hairy man for an answer or simple explanation.
"Cantola paki sana qua, hom fali nali no kolo sansi, hashaka sana qua." "What I'm saying, little girl," said the hairy man, "is that your aunt is in hibernation mode, rather like a bear when it retreats for the winter months. The body is hardwired sometimes to shut itself down for a while it begins to heal itself, so that it stays in a long sweet sleep, and repairs are made. Sometimes that body flatlines, deciding it can't take on the challenge, and the person will evacuate their body. But that is never going to happen in your aunt's case, because, as I was saying, it is not her time, and your aunt has never agreed to leave early. She has still got life left to live, and so she is not going anywhere."
"But how can you be sure of this?" I asked. "You don't even know my Aunt Louise. Well, not really. I know you helped her that time, but you don't know her in person."
"Foko no tola, sanguina. I told you there's a time for everything, young man, and it is not your aunt's time to go. When she was pushed over by the wind into the tree and fell backwards, I could see all the green shoots in her energy signature, like you might see in the abundance of shoots in the ground, even if those shoots are trampled on and some damage is done. What do? They repair themselves, and before you know it, life once again bursts through the ground, stronger than it was before. The same thing will happen for your aunt. She will wake up soon. I can assure you of that. I wouldn't say such things if it were not true. Now I better be going. I have some travelling to be done. I'm meeting up with my mother for the hunt."
When the hairy man told us that Aunt Louise would ultimately wake up, I wholeheartedly believed his every word, as did my sister Gretchen. We did not doubt him for a second. I knew the sagacious, wise hairy man seemed to have an innate, almost supernatural ability and understanding of things that I knew nothing about. I could feel an excitement fluttering around in my heart, and me and my sister were so incredibly animated, we hurried back to the cabin to tell my mother the great news. She didn't have to worry about Aunt Louise's condition any more, because Aunt Louise would be getting better. She'd wake up when the time was right, and she was not going to die. I could visualize my mother ebulliently dancing around with us on the kitchen floor, looking radiantly happy about the great news we had to convey to her. We burst through the front door of the cabin and hurriedly ran into the kitchen. My mother was seated at the table with an empty glass of wine in her hands. Her fingers were physically trembling. How much wine had she drunk, I wondered. Her skin was flushed, her cheeks rosy, and the end of her nose decidedly pink. It always went like that after she'd drunk too much.
"What are you staring at, Donovan?" my mother said. "Never seen a glass of wine before? Why are you back so early? You're supposed to be out there playing, aren't you? I gave you all this free time. What are you doing back here?"
"Mum, you shouldn't drink. You promised Dad you wouldn't touch the stuff anymore. It's very bad for you. If Dad knew, he'd be very upset with you," I told my mother. "The wine in the cellar is only for special occasions."
"Your father must know nothing about this. Do you understand, Donovan?"
I nodded half-heartedly, that is, wondering if I could possibly keep the secret from my father. He deserved to know what my mother was doing to herself. It wasn't right.
"What are you staring at, Gretchen?"
my mother asked, sensing that both me and my sister were studying her curiously, like an exhibit at the museum. "Mummy, we saw the big hairy man again, the one that rescued Aunt Louise," Gretchen spouted out excitedly.
"What are you talking about, Gretchen?" my mother asked. "What hairy man?"
"The one that found Aunt Louise in the woods and brought her back to the cabin."
What about him, Gretchen? My mother asked.
Well, he told us that Aunt Louise will definitely wake up, I interjected on my sister's behalf. Mum, Aunt Louise is not going to die. She's coming home soon. She's just sleeping. The hairy man said her body is focusing on healing, that's all. When she's better, she'll wake up. He says she's definitely going to wake up. He saw it in her energy signature. We all carry an energy signature you see on the outside of our body. Most people can't physically see it, but you can tell things about that person if you can read the energy signature. And Aunt Louise has a green energy signature. Green means life. She's still got a whole lot of living to do. He says it's not her time to go, that she's still got life to live. My mother looked at me, with rage creeping into her eyes.
I don't know who this hairy man is, but you can go and tell him to suck eggs, will you? Who the hell does he think he is, telling you Aunt Louise is going to wake up? He knows nothing about her condition, nothing at all. Is he trying to pretend he's psychic or something? I don't buy into all that stuff and nonsense, and neither should you. You should know better than that.
Mum, he knows things. He's very clever, I told her.
Only God knows things like that, Donovan, said my mother, glaring at me. Now stop your stuff and nonsense, will you, and get the hell out of this kitchen. I need some time to myself. If you don't want to play out of doors, that's well and good. But then you can go to the lounge and continue with your work. In that moment my heart sank. I could see it would take more than a miracle to lift my mother out of her melancholic, grimy ditch in which she found herself so sadly entrenched. She simply refused to believe that Aunt Louise was going to get any better any time soon. She had clearly decided to turn to drink in order to cope with her grief. I knew if my father, who was in his study tapping away at his computer, were to see my mother right now, drowning her sorrows in one of those expensive bottles of wine, he'd be less than pleased about this. Over the next couple of weeks, I'm sad to say that my mother began to drink a hell of a lot, but she managed to function normally and kept the house in good condition, while successfully hiding the fact that she was drinking behind my father's back, who for some reason seemed blindly oblivious of what she was doing under his nose. I sometimes wondered if my father was deliberately turning a blind eye to my mother's drinking problem, as it was easier to be blissfully ignorant than to admit the truth. Me and Gretchen knew that slowly but surely the expensive collection of prized wines my parents had proudly collected over the years were beginning to get drunk in stealth by my mother. I would watch my mother cunningly fill the wine bottles with water and replace them back into the cellar, so it looked as if nothing had been drunk. She did this so expertly, it was easy to be fooled. So dare I say this, she was masterfully pulling the wool over my father's eyes. I really wanted to tell my father what was going on, but he seemed happy that my mother was making more of an effort these days. She was supervising our homework, cooking for us, and even running a duster around the house from time to time, so the cabin looked warm and inviting again. I knew it was the alcohol that was helping her function better, but even at 10 years old, I fully appreciated that this was no way for my mother to be dealing with her stress. Before long, things would spiral out of control. I was sure of that, and my mother might turn into a raging alcoholic. It was then that I promptly decided I absolutely had to tell my father what was going on. He needed to know that behind his back my mother was drinking like a fish. I knew this revelation would upset him greatly, but he had to know the truth. I couldn't keep the secret from him any longer. One morning I was knocking rather tentatively on my father's study door. I wasn't happy about what I was going to convey to him, because I knew I was being a snitch. "Come in," my father called. I reluctantly entered the study, but my father gave me a warm, encouraging smile and looked up at me from the computer. "Everything all right, Donovan?" he asked, raising one of his bushy dark brows. "To what do I owe this pleasure?" "It's Mum," I said rather gingerly. "What about your mother?" he asked me. "She's so much better these days, is she not? She's been making a marvellous effort around the house. I know it's been tough for her, with Aunt Louise being in coma. Well, in a coma. But I'm proud of the remarkable efforts she's making at long last. At least she's not locking herself up in the bedroom all day. That's a huge turnaround as far as I'm concerned." "Dad, you don't know the truth.
You don't see what I see, because you're working all the time. But a lot has been going on behind your back that you know nothing about, and it's not good, I'm afraid.
What is that I'm failing to see, son? Go on, enlighten me, will you?
Mum is drinking, Dad. She's always drinking. She hides it from you. She washes the smell of the alcohol away with mouthwash, and she sucks peppermints all the time, so you can't tell what she's doing. I don't mean to snitch on her, Dad, I really don't, but I'm so worried about her. I know she doesn't act drunk, but she is drunk most of the time. She hides it well, that's all.
My father let out a chuckle. I think I would know if your mum was drinking, son.
I see her drinking, Dad, all the time. So does Gretchen. You can ask her if you don't believe me. She sees Mum drinking too.
Son, where are you getting this idea from? Your mother hasn't been into Anchorage for ages. Where on earth would she acquire this alcohol you speak of from? I may remind you, she'd have to buy it first. And I know for a fact that she hasn't touched the stuff in the cellar. I've been keeping tabs on all those bottles, to be sure.
Dad, she's been drinking all the wine from the cellar. That's where she's getting it from. It's your prize collection that she's drinking.
That is not possible, son. The bottles of wine in the cellar have not been drunk. I would know if our stock had been diminished in any way. Besides, I trust your mother. She gave me her solemn promise she wouldn't ever drink again, after I caught her last time, and threw the wine in the sink, if you remember. I made her swear to me that she'd never touch a drop of alcohol again, and she promised me she would not.
Dad, she's lying to you.
My father frowned. What makes you so sure, Donovan, that she's drinking wine in the cellar? The last time I looked, all the bottles were there, and that was only the other day.
Because I saw her, Dad. I'm always seeing her. She's very conniving. She fills the wine bottles in the cellar with water. She then makes them look like they're brand new, as if they haven't been opened. But she's got through so much of that wine. She's probably drunk most of your collection already. When she asks you to go to Anchorage, that is probably when she'll be buying more boxes behind your back, I bet.
My father's face drained of its colour. Why did you not tell me this before, Donovan?
I don't know. I guess I was just scared, Dad.
Scared of what, son?
Mummy getting angry with me and you getting upset when you realise Mummy's not getting better after all.
Son, you did the right thing telling me this, said my father. Leave this to me, will you?
My father rose from his chair and abruptly walked past me. I followed him like a bashful lapdog as he made his way to the cellar, and he began to look through all the bottles of wine. He inspected the bottles closely, and I heard him whistle and say,
"I'll be damned. You're right, son. Many of these bottles have been tampered with, and they look like they contained coloured water, and have been put back so ingeniously by your mother. It's almost impossible to tell they've been drunk at all. I'm almost impressed by her treachery."
Let's just say my dad was less than amused by this. I followed him as he went storming into the kitchen, his whole body shaking like a rattle with indignation. It was the angriest I'd ever seen him before, and for a moment I began to deeply regret having told him what my mother had been getting up to behind his back. My mother was in the kitchen at the range, stirring something in a very large pot that smelt extremely good. I believe she was making a bolognese sauce to serve with pasta. I could smell the delicious scent of herbs and garlic. I'd seen her sneak a drink this morning, so it was lucky that she could hold her alcohol extremely well, which I suspect was one of the reasons my father probably chose to believe that she had not been drinking behind his back. But alcoholics, I understand, can be masterfully cunning in hiding the extent to which they actually drink.
"What is this?"
my father asked my mother, presenting her with a bottle of wine that was filled with the coloured water. My father ripped away the cork and the covering, and he emptied the water from the wine bottle into the sink and said,
"This is not wine, is it, love? This is coloured water, is it not? I think you've got some explaining to do, Angela."
My mother's face paled. It turned a shade of pink.
"What are you talking about? It's a bottle of wine, Ivan," she said. "It was a bottle of wine, you mean? but the bottle has been very cleverly filled with coloured water that looks as if it's wine. You drank the wine in this bottle, didn't you, Angela? I'm not a fool. I can see what's going on here. And to say that I am furious is an understatement.
I can't think what you're talking about, Ivan. You're not making any sense at all. Why would you throw perfectly good wine like that out in the sink?
That was coloured water, and you know it. And you know it because you put that water in the bottle. You had me fooled, love. You have got through hundreds of bottles behind my back, have you not? We've been collecting those wines for years, and you've been drinking them all. I'm going to lock that cellar up right now, so you can't get your hands on any more alcohol. I've had enough of your duplicity, Angela. You cannot be drinking while looking after our children. You have a responsibility, Angela, to take care of our kids. And all you selfishly think about is yourself all the time. You are self-centered, Angela. You disgust me. Don't you even care about your own children? Do you think they want a drunk for a mother? You seriously need help, Angela. You really do. And whether you like it or not, first thing tomorrow morning, I'm taking you to Anchorage to see Dr. Thornby. You cannot go on like this. You're barely functioning. I've had enough. And I'm not putting up with this a second longer. Do you understand?
I won't go to see Dr. Thornby. You can't make me, my mother cried out indignantly. Besides, there's nothing wrong with me at all. I'm perfectly fine.
Nothing wrong with you, Angela? I beg to differ,
my father said, his eyes widening in disbelief.
Are you kidding me? Look at you. You're an absolute mess. How much wine are you actually getting through in that cellar? You've drunk so much, I'm terrified to count. It's not normal to rely on drink to function. And all this time you made me believe that things were improving around here. That finally, at long last, you'd got your act together. And the kids were getting their mother back. You were beginning to make things look good around the house. You were cooking again and looking after the kids' homework. The only thing propping you up all the time, so that you were functioning normally, was drink. Thank God Donovan told me what was going on with you. Because you had me fooled, Angela. I can't believe I've been so blind-sighted. I should have guessed something was up with you.
My mother's face grew red, her eyes fixed on me with dagger looks. I was standing in the doorway trembling. I could sense my mother's unbridled rage that was boiling up inside her like a kettle on the hob. "You!" she said, pointing a dagger of a finger at me. "How dare you, Donovan, go telling your father about this? How dare you snitch on me?"
"Don't you dare go blaming Donovan for this. He informed me what was going on because he loves you. He's extremely worried about you. To see his mother drinking to excess, he was reluctant to tell me what was going on, but I'm very glad he did. He's a responsible young man."
My mother growled at us. "I hate the both of you. Get away from me," she shrieked belligerently, storming off to her bedroom and locking the door behind her. Somehow I had a sense that once Dad locked up the cellar and Mum couldn't get to any of the wine to anaesthetize her emotional discord, that things would get progressively worse from now on.
"Well, that went well, didn't it?" said my father. "First thing in the morning I'm taking your mother to Anchorage to see Dr. Thornby. I should have done that a long time ago. We need to fix this problem."
Later that afternoon, my mother was pretending to be nice to me. She asked me if I wanted to come with her for a casual stroll to the woods, and I immediately smelt a rat. My mother never went for walks in the woods. I knew my mother was up to something. I could see a tight look on her face, that she was hiding something, and I knew what this was about. It was easy to guess. I suspected when we were out of the woods away from my father's sight, my mother would lightly blow a tangent at me. She knew I was the one that had snitched on her about the alcohol. I guess she wanted to express her extreme indignation without my father around to rein her in. She was mad at me. Let's just say a drunk that is deprived of alcohol is not going to take it very well. Since Aunt Louise's accident, my mother had shown no interest in going for a walk, but I reluctantly agreed to go with her, as I had been raised to do her bidding, and refusing her was not something I'd be inclined to do. "Can Gretchen come with us?" I asked. already knowing what the answer would be.
"No, she can't. I think it would be nice to go for a walk with you,"
said my mother, giving me a watery, insincere smile.
"Let's spend some quality time together, shall we, Donovan?" she said in a saccharine, sweet voice. "I haven't been for a walk with you in ages, and what a beautiful day it is."
I felt rather nervous as I walked with my mother down the footpath, with Pipkin charging ahead of us into the woods. I wish I could say I was happy about this walk. It really was beautiful in the woods. On any other occasion, I would certainly have been glad of the fresh air and exercise. But right now I was walking on eggshells, waiting for my mother to erupt into a fireball of anger. Finally, my mother stopped in her tracks, turned around, and looked straight at me, with dark, furious eyes.
"How dare you, Donovan? How dare you tell your father that I was drinking? I needed that wine to function. Don't you understand? How could you do this to me? I'm your mother, for goodness sake."
In that moment, my mother just burst into tears. She then just sat down on the ground, sobbing. She was inconsolable with grief, and truly I felt like a prize cad for snitching on her in the way that I had.
"I was drinking, Donovan, because it helps me get through the day. Don't you understand that?"
"Ma'am, I'm really sorry. I told Dad about it because you need help. You know you do. You shouldn't be drinking so much. It's not healthy."
"What did you say?"
said my mother, wiping the tears from her red puffy eyes. For a second she looked so enraged, like a rabid dog that was about to launch a furious attack on me. And the next thing I knew was she was shaking me hard. Pipkin was barking at my mother, and barking loudly, and my mother was screaming at me and slapping me with her hands.
"How could you do this to me? How could you do this to me, Donovan?"
"I'm so sorry, Mum," I cried out.
"I had to tell Dad. I was worried about you." "No, you weren't worried about me, Donovan. You were thinking of yourself as usual. You're always thinking of yourself. Why did I raise such a selfish young man?"
My mother continued to shake me hard. I was amazed by her strength, and she was beginning to hurt me, and I was crying out,
"Mum, please stop! Please stop!"
Pipkin continued to bark furiously. The next thing I knew, the hairy man had pulled my mother off me. He appeared from nowhere, and when my mother saw him, she stood there shaking like a leaf, and everything went incredibly calm. She stared up into the hairy man's eyes, and I'm telling you this with certainty. I know he was hypnotizing her. I absolutely know it with every fibre of my being, because when he'd finished holding her gaze, I heard his voice in my own head telling me all would be well now, and I was to go home. I am not kidding when I say this to you, but my mother completely forgot about her grievances over the alcohol. She left the woods with a skip in her step, telling me how she couldn't wait for Aunt Louise to get better, and how Aunt Louise would be home very soon. My mother's personality, after her interaction with the Bigfoot, changed so dramatically. I didn't know what to make of it. The strangest conundrum of all is when I asked her what she thought of the hairy man that we'd encountered in the woods, she looked at me as if I was stark raving mad and said,
"What hairy man are you talking about, Donovan? There was no hairy man."
That was when I realized that the hairy man had made my mother no longer remember him. He had incredible abilities, that was for sure. When my mother returned to the cabin, she began industriously fixing everything up in the cabin. She was back to her old self again, singing to herself all day long. She'd visit Aunt Louise in hospital, and when the doctors gave her a grim report on Aunt Louise, she would roll her eyes, throw her arms up dismissively in the air, and tell the doctors that Aunt Louise would wake up, and they didn't know what they were talking about.
"Ma'am," they would say, "I'm afraid to say it's not looking good for your sister." My mother would answer, "Just you wait and see. She's going to wake up any time soon." Ostensibly, my father could not comprehend the dramatic metamorphosis in my mother's character. In a whisper of a breath, he'd got his wife back, and me and my sister were once again reacquainted with the mother we loved so much. My father never even took my mother to Anchorage to see Dr. Thornby, as she expressed no interest in drowning her sorrows in alcohol any more. Instead, she industriously began to refurbish Aunt Louise's bedroom, painting it in bright yellow.
She went off to Anchorage to buy all kinds of bits and bobs for Aunt Louise, including beautiful comforters, pillows, cushions, bed linens and covers. She turned my aunt's bedroom into a work of art that would have looked right at home in a glossy magazine.
We need the bedroom to be absolutely perfect for your Aunt Louise when she comes back home, she said,
and I knew by the way she was speaking with such a pronounced conviction that she was not even nursing a shadow of doubt that Aunt Louise would be coming home. My father looked extremely troubled by this. He was wondering if my mother's positive changes were because she was now in complete denial about Aunt Louise's precarious condition.
Love, he told her kindly, I'm extremely proud of your progress. You've made me very impressed that you're not drinking, and you're taking such good care of the kids, the house and me. You've made your sister Louise's room look beautiful. I'm just a bit worried you're getting your hopes up about your sister. You do realize she might not wake up.
What my mother said next to my father is exactly what the hairy man had told me and my sister Gretchen.
Ivan, she said, everything has a season. The flowers do not burst through the earth until it's summer and spring, for they know they wouldn't survive the winter months. So they switch off, do they not? But when the time is right, they wake up, and once again they grace the meadows with their cheerful colours. Louise will do the same. She'll wake up soon when she's good and ready.
I know this is impossible to believe, but 7 days after this, my Aunt Louise woke up from her coma, and within a week she'd returned home, as if nothing had ever happened, and everything returned to normal again, almost as if the grief we'd been through as a family was just a passing nightmare that had never really happened. Needless to say, Aunt Louise never even remembered anything about her unfortunate accident, and Pipkin was so happy to be reunited with his very best friend, greeting her as if she'd returned home from a long trip abroad. I marvelled how accurate the hairy man had been about everything, and I'm glad to say I did see him a handful of times after that. But these days, as a married man that now lives in Juneau with my family, I think over those memories of my childhood with so much fondness. So there you are. That's my story.
Wow, what an incredible story.
Well, hello there. I hope you enjoyed the Omnibus edition. We've got many more coming our way for you to listen to. Sending you love wherever you are in the world, in North America, Canada, Kenya, wherever you may be. I send you lots and lots of love. Thank you for listening to my Omnibus, and I really do hope you enjoyed it, because that's the whole idea about it, is to give you some interesting stories to listen to. So until next time, goodbye and good night.